jaygrapher, and I wanted to discuss this Canon 5.6 issue just for fun and just sharing the observations I've had through different commentaries. And of course, by the time that this comes out, there might be some reviews, so just want to make clear that I have not seen any independent reviews of this camera just yet. So if anything becomes out of date, well, apologize, of course, you know. But the thing here is that it's not just talking about Canon, but just an observation of different brands as well, that they have this kind of Trinity camera bodies that they are trying to sell that are in the upper ends of their catalog. Now, there are a few companies that I will admit it does not fit perfectly, but right now we have the standard camera that does both things well. So the hybrid camera of both photo and video. Then there's the higher resolution version of that camera, so it's higher megapixels for photo, and those usually will become more expensive. And then we have the higher end from that, so the level 3, which will be the specialized model. And with that description, of course, you may think of certain camera brands or camera models. And with that said, I will start with Fujifilm actually. And for Fujifilm, in that category would be the X-T30, X-T4, and then X-H1. Now, there might be some debate between the X-T30. We can say the X-T4 would be the lower end hybrid camera, so it does both video and photo, while the Pro 2 is the higher end, not necessarily higher resolution, but it is the photography focus camera and it's less for video. And then the X-H1 is as designed supposed to be the more video focused camera. Now I would want to come back to this topic for Fujifilm a little bit later, because there will be the X-T40 and X-H2, but I don't want to get into that right now. So moving forward from that, we have the Nikon Z50, Z6, and then Z7. So similar to Fuji, the 50 is more for an introductory model, while Z6 is more of the hybrid camera, and then Z7 is a higher end megapixel type camera. But now we have the Lumix series, Panasonic, with the S1 hybrid, S1R high resolution, and then S1H. High end for video with a fan, and we will get to that with Canon's overheating. And lastly, we have the great Sony with the A7 III, and then A7R3, and then A7S2, but with the S3 coming up soon. And so for the Sony version, but now we have the Canon EOS R, R5, R6. Now I just put R in there even though it's a previous generation model, but it doesn't really fit. Now this is where I come back to what Canon should have done, is to follow the Panasonic style, which is the R6 would be their usual hybrid camera like the S1, while the R5 is then their S1R model, but maybe not 8K, the same like 4K, or maybe they push a little bit to 6K because they still want that weather sealing, correct? But then for Canon to do their 8K, now they will have a third model, let's say the Canon R4, the third one, which will have then a fan to be able to power that 8K resolution. Now this is a little bit more speculation, but I think it's quite smart, because ever since they somewhat alluded to rumors that Canon will have 8K, and a lot of people were speculating, with good reason of course, speculating because of Canon's history. They have made a lot of flawed sort of high resolution video in the past, and then we just needed to wait and see what will happen, and there's a lot of big promises. And they of course delivered right now, and everybody who sort of had doubts or who are following the news is like, okay, you did it, great job. But then it overheats and it's like, okay, now you have a reliability problem there. But for some reason, to criticize Canon or overheating to be a flaw is somehow an unreasonable criticism for some reason. I don't know why. And it's quite unfair because a lot of users need reliability. Same with people who criticize Fuji to not have reliable IBIS, not reliable autofocus. There's a lot of videos going around in the recent few weeks talking about different users and YouTubers who were doing testing on Fujifilm, testing the different lenses to different autofocus settings here and there, and the conclusion overall is to actually know your gear better if you are using Fujifilm, that each lens will do best in a different autofocus setting, and depending on what you're doing, there will be a different autofocus setting that you would need to use. And that is sort of a workaround, right? Fujifilm does not have the best autofocus, especially for video. And so there are workarounds for it where you will need to know your gear better, or you go for manual focus, etc. But then when you have an overheating problem, then what do you do, right? There's no real possible workaround besides don't shoot too long, let the camera cool down, or just be in a colder environment. And with other cameras, even Sony, I remember, or even the X100V had news about overheating when doing video. Though the X100V wasn't a video camera per se, it just had quite good video capabilities with a HDMI port to connect to an Atomos or something. And so what do other companies do is to increase the threshold of when the camera would actually turn off. And with that patch and other refinements, the overheating issue went away. But then Canon here is like, we don't want to increase that threshold, and so we want to quote unquote protect our internals. Okay, fine, but you will still have this flaw of overheating and a problem of reliability. And for some people, they do need to shoot hours at a time. And I mostly shoot events that go for hours as well, so it's like, sorry, this is not for me. Not bashing Canon, it's just I cannot buy this one. So I'll simply look forward to the Sony A7S III and see what they have in store. Of course I still like Fuji, and that's a different situation, but I still am keeping my eyes open. Now back to like these like 3 camera setup. I do believe that like Canon would have made a very good choice to have a third body, a Canon R4 that has a fan to do 8K, whilst their Canon R5, let's say, has the better weather sealing, of course, but does not do 8K yet, or no 8K at all. Just have very high video resolutions, etc., and bitrate, etc. But this is where I think it's quite smart, because people speculate once again, what will Canon do when they release this kind of camera and it would cannibalize their cinema line? So I think it was actually on purpose to limit the Canon R5, R6 long recording abilities, because in the R they added a crop. Okay, there's a crop, but you shoot 4K. They tried to take out 24p, but a lot of people were complaining, with good reason, of course. And then there's some people who try to justify like, oh, why do you actually need 24? Well, it doesn't matter why I need 24. They took out a feature that has been in all the previous cameras since forever. And to people who defend Canon, even this overheating issue and defend Canon, it just seems that it's very anti-consumer. But I do think this overheating issue, and not to increase the limitation of the heat sensor, is on purpose, because they want their cinema line to be that long duration record time and high definition record thing. If the R5 does have unlimited recording at 8K, then the cinema line would be taken over much more than it might have been. There are a few other differences, of course, with different ports or audios and etc. But the mere fact that when a customer looks between these two cameras and it's like, I do need to record long periods of time, but I still want that quality, then they would still be pushed towards the cinema line, because they see the R5 has overheating issues, whilst the general public would say, oh, I don't need to record for that long, the R5 is enough for me and it's quite perfect. Now going back to the previous series, the Canon EOS R, now that has a crop but it doesn't overheat, so people then are saying, it has a crop, so this one I really don't want that crop because I'm already getting full frame, I want that full frame look, and so they might get a cinema line instead that can record the full frame or whatnot, etc. So it's just a give and take. Now why this sort of means so much to me, because I really was looking at Canon and looking forward to it as the idea, and this came from the Everything Man on YouTube who's using the Canon EOS R, and it was like really good, the kind of footage that he's able to do, and he's actually shown real working conditions, not just vlogging. And I don't think I should be like stepping away to seeing clips from people who vlog as a way to test their footage, because vlogging and actually shooting events or action is a totally different thing and different use cases. If people want a good vlogging camera, there's a camera for that, but then if someone wants a good video camera for other work, then there's a camera for that. It's hard to mix the two together unless you're going really expensive, but really expensive means really heavy, which is not a good vlogging setup anyways. But back to the Everything Man, I really had the plan to get a second-hand EOS R and then use the rest of the budget to get a good 16 to 35, and only in the near future after that get the R6. And so I would have a setup where the EOS R would be the high megapixel camera for photography, while the R6 then becomes the main video camera, and then I'll be switching to Canon. But sadly, even at 4K, it overheats. Now that is crazy, because 8K overheats great. That, yeah, we can understand. Weather sealed 8K is gonna get hot. Even the S1H with 6K needs a fan. Fine, but then you still overheat heat at 4K. Every other camera shoots 4K and does not overheat. And so what is the excuse for that one? I really wonder. And to say like, oh, you're a Canon hater, like there's no hating, it's just why is it like this? Sooner or later Sony will come out and say our 4K does not overheat, and you already finished. Unless of course people who want that 8K and does not shoot long periods of time. It really depends. And so this is all I have to say. I do believe that this overheating issue is just to limit and not to cannibalize Canon's cinema line, and in a perfect world Canon should have made a third body where there's a fan for 8K like the S1H, while the Canon R5 would just be a high megapixel, high resolution video camera with like 4K or 6K, and the Canon R4 supposedly in a perfect world again would have a 8K with a fan. But that's not the case, and I look forward to seeing the Sony A7S III. One last thing before I go, I really don't understand what or who some of these guys are watching to say that people are hating on the camera, since most or a lot of videos have a lot of great content creators talking about how, and giving great advice actually to their communities to do not buy the camera early or do not pre-order the camera. And isn't it really weird that there are no like reviews, that people are not allowed to use the camera, and of course the excuse is pre-production, but that's never been a new thing for any other camera brand. Once again, just making more excuses defending Canon. And lastly are people making videos such as, I'm getting the Canon R5 but maybe you shouldn't. Now this might be very specific to a certain person, but there's a general idea of videos like that going around, giving that kind of advice to people, which I think are great videos, and none of them are really hating on the camera. It's just that it's important to tell the viewers what they're getting themselves into, and do not buy too much into the 8K hype. The thing about oh, you're shooting in 8K for future proof. But an advice that was given to me recently, since I really do like to talk about technology. It's not like gear syndrome, it's just love of technology. And the thing is that, you know, if there's 8K now, there's gonna be 8K in the future. And then what's the point of really getting that 8K now when there might be better 8K in the future as well, you know? And so the idea of like, don't get the camera now as being a sign of like putting down Canon or anything is just really nonsense. It's really up to the consumer if the camera is good for them or not, and it's not really hating on Canon as a company or they made a bad camera or something. And in the end, with future proofing, there'll be more 8K cameras coming in the future, so it's not like this is the last camera ever. And with future proofing, there's been plenty of times where you shoot in 4K or 1080p, you can always upscale it, doing it correctly, upscale it to the next set stage of resolution, whether it's 1080p to 4K or 4K to 6K, 8K. There's always those options anyways. So yeah, really don't buy into the hype and think about it carefully. That's all. So let me know what you think with like the idea of having a fan or having a third camera body, and I will see you all next time. Bye for now.